Welcome to the J&B Talk F1 podcast. It's Wednesday, the 28th of October, and we have the wash-up from the United States Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton, champion once again, second year in succession, now 3 titles to boot. And what a race it was, it must be said. One of the classics in hindsight. There was no less than 2 safety cars, a couple more virtual safety cars. It was on for young and old, really. And as a result, with 3 races remaining, yes, there's not much to play for, but with Mexico on the horizon, there's plenty to discuss on that point. And on the topic of Lewis Hamilton, we look at the case for whether the Briton is a legend, or is it too early to really make any definitive summation on his legacy. Bernie Ecclestone, he's come out quite recently and he's mentioned that Mercedes actually reneged on Red Bull, who, of course, with their little acrimonious debacle going on with Renault there, rumours that Mercedes actually went back on their word to supply the Milton Keynes outfit. So quite a juicy little notion there. And also very much related to that topic, the push for this independent engine, which has come into the news the past few days. And a lot of talk about Ferrari and their veto power. They've exercised this because of their concerns that this might be a threat to them. And last but not least, as we mentioned off the top, Mexico this weekend, but there is a threat, very ominous, continuing on from last weekend, of the weather destroying what would be a glorious return to the circuit, which last featured in 1992. Anyway, as ever, I'm Baden Westerweller. Joining me, Jawad Yaqub. How are you today?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Baden. Glad to have finally caught up on all the sleep that I lost over the weekend for the Grand Prix, qualifying and then the race taking place on the same day. And, it was a bit of a shame how we had to do our podcast before we had any sort of idea what was going on the Saturday night. But, yeah, regardless, we were rewarded in the end with a pretty good race. It had everything in there. The wet conditions as well, saw a few different lead changes. And overall, I guess, you got Lewis Hamilton in the end taking the championship out. And overall, yeah, good race to view.
Oh, absolutely. It's up there, the top 3 or 4 of the season. Of course, we saw Britain, the elements came into the equation, and that was a classic. And it was no less the case here. We ended up getting a race which was uninterrupted by those really quite threatening conditions on the Friday and the Saturday. And of course, the Sunday qualifying was truncated to just the 2 sessions. Nico Rosberg on pole there, and ultimately he looked like a man for a large portion of that race, that he might have been on track to continue that title bid by Hamilton to this weekend. But as it was, a late mistake for the German, and Lewis Hamilton, didn't need a second invitation, and he's world champion with 3 rounds remaining.
No, he didn't need any sort of invitation at all. We saw from the rather aggressive start, which has caused a bit of debate amongst the critics between Hamilton and Rosberg. It looked as if Hamilton was just giving Rosberg a bit of a push wide on going up atop turn 1. Rosberg clearly sees that, it was aggression from Hamilton. He was quite seething at the end of that race for various reasons. No more than, as you said, his own mistake that he made at, just before the end of the race, lap 43. Oh, no, sorry, not lap 43.
47? It would have been 9 laps remaining.
Yeah, it was 47. 9 laps. 43 is when Kvyat had his crash, sorry. But, yeah, Rosberg had his little moment at turn 2, lit up the rears, and, just a rookie error, I guess you could say, and that allowed Hamilton to take the lead and eventually win the race and win his 3rd championship.
Well, those are the kind of incidents in isolation which separate the men from the boys, essentially. And for Lewis Hamilton, he's a polarising figure, it has to be said, between the both of us. We're not his most ardent fans, but the point is he's 3 times a champion. Clearly he's done something right on the track, and he's really made it stick time and time again this season. And even though it looked for a large portion on Sunday or Monday, as it was here, like you wouldn't be able to get the job done there, he came through at the end, and he's fully deserving.
Very much so. And we'll look back at the race now, and it was a great 4-way battle at the start between Mercedes and the Red Bulls in the intermediate conditions. Everyone joked about when Bernie Eccleston said, "Oh, I should have sprinklers on the side of the track to spice up the races." And a lot of people actually took heed to that last weekend, and said, "Oh, if we had more races like this in intermediate conditions, we'd see a lot more action." But Daniel Ricciardo certainly after the race said that it felt so good to be back in front, where he wants to be and where the team should be. And Red Bull had such good pace in the wet, and they were able to manage their intermediate tyres better than the Mercedes, and Kvyat as well, dicing with the likes of Hamilton at the front. But until the conditions really dried out and they made the switch over to slicks, Red Bull really had the measure of the Silver Arrows.
It was a great shame, really. As soon as that did occur, they faded very rapidly, it must be said, to the point that they were really outside the points there for a while, and then ultimately culminating in we'll discuss shortly, Danny Kvyat's big crash into that pit lane entry in the closing stages. Daniel Ricciardo had his own little tangle with Nico Hülkenberg, which considerably slowed his charge again. So really it was one of those weekends where they promised a lot, but the weather just didn't quite conspire to their package, which was looking very handy in those changeable conditions.
Yeah, and in those, because the weather had played such a big part in that weekend, Red Bull opted not to take the upgrades that Renault had brought for the power unit, as it would have had no really effect in the wet weather. So that'll be saved for another time, perhaps Brazil or even the season finale. But we'll go back to the start of the race. There was an interesting melee that happened between Fernando Alonso, Roman Grosjean, Valtteri Bottas, and I think even Will Stevens got tangled up as well, where two of those cars actually were spun. They were facing backwards, and then there was a lot of debris that ended up coming out onto the track, and that was the thing that triggered the first virtual safety car to clear up all that debris. And Grosjean and Bottas actually retired from the race subsequently, and as did Will Stevens as well. And after that came back in, we saw Ricciardo take the lead for a short time, and then going into that first phase of pit stops, Red Bull, despite double stacking, they still had both their cars ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Not Nico Rosberg, I think he split the two Red Bulls, but at least they had a Kvyat ahead of Hamilton. But as we said before, in the dry conditions, the track started to come to the Mercs, and Red Bull just really fell away.
And as we did see around mid-distance, Marcus Ericsson, not a very aggressive incident at all. It was more just mechanical failure there. Yet the precarious positioning of his car triggered that first safety car, having seen that virtual safety car initially, and this really neutralised the field. So ultimately, you could look at it, that was a big decisive turning point of the race. It really brought several of those drivers who had really been off the pace back into contention. And for Mercedes, it looked at that point as though Nico Rosberg would be the one to go for it.
Very much so. And talk about Ericsson and Sauber's 400th Grand Prix as well. It was a bit of a shame to see both the Sauber cars on the second lap at turn one. They had a bit of a tangle up there, and I think as a result of the damage or whatever that Ericsson sustained, that's why he retired the car. So not the best way to go about their 400th Grand Prix. But we saw Sebastian Vettel emerge into the fray now after starting down in 13th or 14th, I think it was. 13th for Vettel, and he emerged into the fray. He swapped for medium tyres under that the full safety car, and he was picking off those Red Bulls who just lost the pace on the slick tyres. And Vettel in contention for the podium. Then as you said, Ricciardo versus Verstappen and Hülkenberg. Verstappen was able to get past without any problem, but with Nico Hülkenberg at the end of the straight, he had a bit of a tangle, and Hülkenberg's front wing damaged, and that took him out of the race. And as a result, Ricciardo ended up finishing 10th, 1 point as a little bit of recompense for what happened earlier in the day.
Yeah, fair to say, as we mentioned before, really, though, considering what could have been, they'd be mighty disappointed, coupled with Kvyat's collision there. They've had a few of those moments the last few races, and indeed, since we keep alluding to, since that midpoint of the year, they've really turned their fortunes around, yet they haven't quite been able to break through for that, what would be dual reward, I guess, despite all the acrimonious stuff going on off the track with their engine.
Yeah, very much so. And 3 podiums they've had. Could have been for in hindsight, perhaps this weekend, but we can't really say that. But yeah, 3 podiums considering their position this year is quite an achievement. But yeah, as a result of Hulkenberg's incident and his wreck on the track, another virtual safety car emerged, and Rosberg pitted from the lead for a fresh set of tyres, and the team decided to leave Hamilton out. And it was at that point where we sort of thought that, hang on, Hamilton still needs to pit for another set of tyres, but if he does it after this virtual safety car, then he's really in no position to be fighting for the lead. He would fall down. So that's when we thought perhaps Hamilton would be out of the picture. But
And indeed, as well, Sebastian Vettel looked very strong odds at that point to take what would have been a miraculous victory.
yeah, he would have only had to have contended with Rosberg at that point. But yeah, then we talk about Kvyat, lap 43. That was Hamilton's saving grace. Kvyat met with a wall before the final corner. I think he just put a rear tyre on one of the AstroTurf, the artificial grass, and just another rookie error, go straight into the wall. He was okay, which was good, but Red Bull no doubt disappointed considering what position they were earlier in the day, and yeah, seeing one of their cars retire, and that brought out the final safety car. And what do you know, Lewis Hamilton pits, and yeah, back in contention.
And soon enough after that, really, it did seem, though, that the German, Nico Rosberg, was going to be able to hold on. He had quite a sizable gap there, maintaining it to Lewis, albeit on that fresher rubber. But then we saw ultimately the error which handed Lewis Hamilton the title. That little moment, rookie error, as you described it, around that, which corner was it in the end?
Turn 2.
Turn
yeah.
2, was it? Yeah, okay. I thought it was on the back part of the track, but there we go.
I read somewhere it was turn 2.
Turn 2, but yeah, very close indeed to putting the whole car into the wall, it looked like. So he managed to pick it up, but it was to no avail for Lewis Hamilton remaining in second, and that was the end of it really for him. And you can see afterwards he was quite bemused.
Yeah, well, that was the final twist in the tail, I guess. That was Nico Rosberg's 2015 championship and to an extent the US Grand Prix. But in that final sprint to the flag, that's what happened. And then even Rosberg looked like he was on chance to lose second as well in that race when Vettel was certainly charging at him towards the end of the race. If Vettel had ended up finishing second, the championship would have rolled on to Mexico, but Rosberg claiming second ensured that Vettel couldn't keep the points and keep the points battle alive. And yeah, a 10th win for Hamilton and a third world championship for him too.
Well, must be said, I lost track of that notion that Vettel was indeed, or is, as it is now, ahead of Nico Rosberg in the standings, hence the excitement on that final lap, the closing couple of corners there, why there was all this bated breath about who's going to come second. Then it clicked, oh, of course, yeah, that's right. Seb is ahead. And we saw Nico just held on in the end by about 1 or 2 tenths of a second, and that was it really. Game over, and Lewis now gets to soak up the next few races, champion-elect.
Yeah, well, it's a matter of pride, I think, now for Rosberg. We'll discuss it in the Mexico preview a little later on, but it's a matter of pride now for Rosberg and to salvage P2 in the championship if it can be done. Otherwise, yeah, if it's not, then, a big disappointment for him, who really, it's been a season full of bad luck and misfortune, and also his own form at times has been questionable. So it's not like we're saying that it's all down on him. He has had his fair share of bad luck this season as well. But yeah, we'll look at that a bit later on. But looking at the other guys in the race now, strong race from McLaren where they were running 5th and 6th at one point, and they looked like they were going to take the strong points. Button ended up finishing 6th, and Alonso unfortunately finished outside the points in 11th. There was a problem on his car and he just tumbled through the field. And at one point when he was still in the points, he was saying, I think we should retire the car. So don't know what that was on about, but yeah, the team insisted he stay out and get those points, but ultimately it didn't materialize.
And there were divided opinions between both drivers post-race. Jenson Button really, and Alonso, of course, we saw with the updated package that he had there. Jenson was quite enthusiastic about what he managed to glean from it. Whereas Alonso, yeah, you can understand considering what had happened, but Alonso complaining that the upgrades had barely brought any kind of inroads for him, despite how strong they had been running for a large portion of that race. And as it was, though, sixth place for Jenson Button. It's a healthy swag of points there. And for Alonso, again, he's just had a campaign to forget, and the rumours will continue as a result, when he makes these little outbursts, of course, after Suzuka, that little jibe about being in a GP2 car. I have to wonder, it's going to come to a point early next season if he's not right up there. The rumours again of him possibly being on the way out of Woking, they'll resurface.
Well, it was interesting how, I think we even said back then that how making these sort of comments, isn't that, one way of getting sacked? I mean, you look at the most prolific example of that was Alain Prost when he was sacked from Ferrari. He made a few bad comments about the car, and there you go. They show him the door. And Alonso, clearly not happy with the car and making his opinions vocal, for the whole world to hear pretty much, wouldn't he be sacked for that if he was at Ferrari perhaps, but who knows. But yeah, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, certainly at Ferrari and those the dying stages of that relationship he had there, he wasn't holding back on those incendiary remarks, and that really just expedited his removal from that team.
Very much so. But I guess for me, during that race, I guess the drivers of that race, if you had to pick a driver of the day, were both the Toro Rosso guys. Max Verstappen finished 4th in the end. There was that moment where he was running 3rd after the final safety car, that the TV images showed Jos Verstappen, and you could see, the elation on his face that, there might be a chance that my son will finish on the podium here. Good old Jos. Getting a bit happy there, but in the end Vettel was quicker and was able to get past, but still 4th. That's equaled his
second as well at Hungary, of course. 4th, second time he's 4th,
yeah,
after
so
coming
he's equaled,
4th at Hungary.
He equaled his career best result, and to have that in your first season as a Toro Rosso driver, 4th, that's pretty good. And then Carlos Sainz in the end finished 7th, but he started plumb last. During qualifying in Q1, he had the shunt with the wall, and you got to give kudos to the team for turning that car around in only a few hours. Qualifying was at 9 o'clock that morning, and then the race was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So they did a good job turning the car around, and scored quite a big haul of points to Toro Rosso. So great stuff from both of those guys. And as we get to the end of the year now, a lot of people are going to start bringing the awards out and whatever. And Verstappen, he's pretty much sealed up Rookie of the Year. But I still think Carlos Sainz has done a good job as well this season. Both of them have really proved that they are ones to look out for the future. Perhaps Verstappen more than anyone. But yeah, you can't put anything past both those guys.
Well, Toro Rosso, as it stands now, they really comprehensively trounced their older brother or sister, as you could refer to them, in Red Bull. They've had those opportunities, really, and they've been making the most of them every time it counts. And we do see, of course, with next season that notion that they could end up back in a relationship with Ferrari to acquire...
Albeit with year-old engines, if Ferrari have their way.
I don't think that's a concern to Toro Rosso, as they say. They'd be quite content with what they've seen from Ferrari itself this season. If they have a continuation of that development on their chassis, we could be seeing pretty much contention for podiums, let alone solid points next season.
Yeah, it would be no surprise if they end up getting a podium in the final 3 races of the season, considering how good their form has been. But yeah, another guy on form, Sergio Perez, back off the back of his podium in Sochi, finished 5th again, and it's good form heading up to his home Grand Prix. I'm sure everyone will be excited in Mexico to have a Mexican driver in the race. So yeah, 5th for Perez.
For Perez, I think you'd have to say he's running pretty closely to the form of his life, which we saw in 2012. He's really finally seemingly moved on from that debacle, his solitary campaign with McLaren in 2013. And if he has another solid season 2016, there have been a few little murmurings that he'd be putting himself into the frame for a Ferrari berth. If everyone
seems to be on Ferrari's shopping list at the moment. You've got the Haas guys, And then, Hulkenberg as always, Perez. But where he is at the moment, and Perez is committed to another season with Force India, of course. Meanwhile, Hulkenberg's committed to 2 seasons. So certainly at the end of next year, because that's 2017 seems to be the year we're going to see the big movers in the silly season. So Perez has put himself in a good place to, if he has another good season next year, he'll certainly be on someone's shopping list for 2017. But then again, we've got so many drivers who are going to miss out for next year, and we've talked so much about this: Stoffel Van Dorn, Kevin Magnussen, etc., etc. It's going to be difficult, but as long as he keeps putting in these good results, that podium this year, he had the podium last year, maybe another couple of podiums next year. Who knows what happens? But yeah, consistent results again from Felipe Nasr and Pastor Maldonado. They scored points at the last race as well, scored points again. So good reward for them considering both of their teammates retired. And Alexander Rossi, at one point we thought he might finish in the points considering cars were dropping like flies at that point. But
I was quite enthusiastic for a while there. I really thought,
Yeah.
especially with the remarks from Fred, and then we saw Ricardo having to pit in those dying stages, that he would have been on for it. Naturally, those two had the horsepower there to hold him off. But it remains to be said, though, he kept his nose really clean, and on the back of his couple of outings he's had now, he's really acquitted himself well to be in contention for one of those berths at Nana in 2016.
For next year, he's definitely one guy you should have. And he finished on the lead lap as well, 12th. His career best finish for him in Formula One in the 3 odd races he has done. So yeah, for a home Grand Prix debut, he did a really good job. And we had 8 retirements in total in the end. Stevens, Bottas, Grosjean, Felipe Massa as well had a problem with his car similar to Bottas. So both Williams, 0 points again. Kimi Raikkonen, unfortunately,
his rallycross skills came to the fore, if anything else.
Yeah, and as a result, he I think cooked the brakes or something, which is why they had to retire.
And there's been a little bit of conjecture as well, just after his little scrap with Bottas at Russia, that people just reconsidering whether it was wise to retain him for 2016. But as it stands, really, he's just had so much bad luck this campaign. You've got to let him have a clean slate, and before you really
he's
judge.
Another driver who's had bad luck this season. I mean, he's done some of it has been his fault, I guess. Italy when he
second on the grid,
on the front row, and just bogged down. Couldn't get the car going off the line. So a lot of bad luck for Raikkonen, some of it his fault, but you got to say we have seen good form from him compared to last season. Ericsson out, Hulkenberg out, Kvyat out. So yeah, almost 50% of the grid.
It's very rare to see this high attrition rate beyond about 20% of the grid, let alone 40 as it was on Sunday. And obviously that the conditions lent a fairly large hand in that being the case, but it certainly livens things up when you've got cars falling like flies, as you alluded to there, and harks back really to the good old days, those 80s, 90s, early 2000s, when it was really just every few laps someone was pulling out.
Yeah, the reliability obviously playing a big part in those days. But anyway, that's the US Grand Prix. We'll move it on now, and this is a bit of a contentious topic, fresh off the back of his 3rd World Championship victory. And is it too early to call Lewis Hamilton a legend of the sport? And we'll go over the facts now, I guess. He's had 43 wins in his career, so he's sitting 3rd at the moment in the all-time winners list, behind Michael Schumacher and Alain Prost. He had 21 wins at McLaren in his 7 years. It was that
6 seasons, yeah.
Yeah, 6 seasons, and in half that time at Mercedes, he's achieved 22 wins and another 2 titles on top of that. He's also the most successful driver and successful British driver in F1 history, and we said last week as well that if he wins this title, he will be the first British driver to win back-to-back titles, and which he has, of course, achieved. And
could you say, a bit tongue-in-cheek there, American?
American driver. I was surprised that he didn't play, the Star Spangled Banner on the podium for him instead of God Save the Queen. But what can you do? Bit of fun. But yeah, over the past few years, we've seen him really mature his sort of because we always used to see when he was at McLaren, and then to an extent the start of his Mercedes tenure as well, that his personal life, his off-track stuff used to interfere with what he would do on track. You know, he'd always be embroiled in relationship issues or whatever, and it was a bit cringeworthy to see. But
Well, it was as late as 12 months ago, really. Even Abu Dhabi, he was still in a relationship with, of course, Miss Scherzinger.
yeah,
And
Nicole
he's
Scherzinger, you know.
that ended in 2015. He's looked better than ever, certainly on the track, spending a lot of time, needless to say, in the recording studio back in stateside as soon as a certain weekend has come to an end. But you've got to tip your hat off to him. He's got his priorities right, and clearly his head's on the job.
Yeah, you know, whatever he keep, and if that's keeping him happy, we can't argue with it. As much as a lot of people don't agree with his choice of lifestyle, it's, you know, what's making making him really good on track. You know, he's relaxed, he has nothing to worry about, he's just out there to do his job. But yeah, you know, we've seen him mature certainly, and I guess the reason why, and we discussed this off air as well, that calling him legend is a bit too early, because you know, he's still got a lot of time ahead of him. He's still got a legacy to complete. You know, he's still probably got another 6-7 years ahead of him. Yeah, 6-7 years ahead of him in Formula One. Let's hope he gets to that stage, and there's still more he can achieve. So it's too early to call him a legend.
It goes without saying as well, we really need to see a classic head-to-head battle, which has been wanting really for the best portion of this decade, 2010, 2012 notwithstanding, where we had those classic dogfights. 2012, who can forget that, with Alonso dragging superhuman effort, that very average Ferrari, into the equation. But last few years, it's been either Vettel or the Mercedes at the front. And we need to see a Ferrari with Vettel at the helm 2016 and beyond, with this the new regulations as well. If Hamilton could pioneer that and come out on top then, and possibly end up with 5 titles in the next, by the time, say, 2018, then be very much valid to consider that he's going to be remembered very fondly whenever he does choose to hang up the helmet. But for now, it's still very early days, as you say.
Yeah, well,
he's only about halfway through his career if he goes the full duration.
Yeah, very much so. And I think another reason against that would be that Sebastian Vettel, he's still younger than Lewis Hamilton.
It's only 28. He could be around for another decade if he wanted
Vettel,
to.
he's younger than Hamilton, yet he's had more success, you know, with 4 titles. I mean, Hamilton's only won one more race than Vettel, 42 for Vettel and 43 for Hamilton. And yet we don't hear the legend name being thrown around with him. And this just comes back to, you know, this thing I've brought up here, is it the power of social media and the just the droves of fans that a particular driver has that drives these debates? I mean, we see that Hamilton has quite a bit of support. He's got a big fan base, and, you know, a lot of, surely it would come from that camp. And also the British press as well. British press seem to be more sort of interested in Formula One and their representative in Lewis Hamilton than the German press do with, say, Sebastian Vettel.
Certainly, it's not on the levels which we saw with Michael Schumacher, when they were really adoring him, his compatriots. And there have to be said, on that whole social media pulling power notion, if these two were around and enjoying the kind of dominance that they have, respectively, the past 5 or 6 seasons, or even 2 decades, in the mid-90s, mid-2000s, when we didn't really have the advent of Facebook, Twitter, and the like there, whether they would have really been just more viewed in objectivity, really, that they're greats. But now you just see word just spreads like wildfire these days. One person spreads a little bit of gossip, oh no, I don't think he's good, and everyone just jumps on the bandwagon, and we go on from there. And we do see across like all of these really the Raw website, which we're constantly contributing to, a lot of very outspoken opinions there on certain individual drivers, such as Hamilton and Vettel.
Well, that's one thing that I also wanted to bring up as well. It seems that with people being able to get their opinion out there a bit more easier these days, do we see, and this is not just in F1 but in a lot of other sports as well, that everyone seems to be looking through rose-tinted glasses at the past. You know, they're saying, oh, you know, how dare you compare Hamilton to Senna or Prost, or how dare you compare Vettel to Schumacher or whatever. It's as if people despite having all this technology and living in the present, despite having all of that, they still want to look back at the past at some things, you know?
It's impossible to compare eras. There's so many wholesale changes technically and politically, circuits, just general,
Yeah.
every little aspect around the current crop compared to whichever era they're being compared to. It's just impossible. And that, as I say, viewing each individual, each title, just objectively for what it's worth, is the best way, the best barometer to ascertain exactly where they're at and where they might be down the track, rather than saying, oh, this guy did this 1991, 92 for safe and Nige. Then to today with Lewis, it's just it's a moot point, but people just don't seem to take any regard to this fact.
Very much so. And I think what I concluded from this debate was that regardless of whoever the athlete, whatever the sport, legend status should be something that should be preserved until the athlete or, the driver, the rider, whatever, moves on from the sport, whether they retire or, whatever happens. We don't want to see any, tragic circumstances ending a particular athlete's career. But yeah, until they fully retire from the sport and they move on, because with a lot of Hall of Fames, for different sports, we see someone inducted once they've retired. They don't get inducted while they're still playing the game, do they?
Just doesn't seem
Certainly with
right.
a lot of football codes as well. We don't see that happen. We don't see that happen whilst the player's still very much in circulation.
And as I believe it might have been you who mentioned a few days ago, or it might have just been something I did devour online, just the concept, if we go and form an opinion on a driver today, what about if in 1 or 2 seasons they're embroiled in some controversy, as we've seen, of course, in Michael Schumacher's time, and that caused many to really reassess what the worth was of what he did achieve against those few little indiscretions ultimately. And it can change at the drop of a hat, and really until they've hung up the helmet definitively, whether they come back in some form or move to another series, then you just can't form that rounded opinion on exactly where they stand against these other drivers from way back when.
Well, one thing we can agree on is that Vettel, Hamilton, Alonso, even, they're certainly great drivers at the moment. They are definitely the best of the best at the moment in the current generation. But when it comes to saying that they're legends, we'll wait until they fully retire, they move on, and then 10 years or even 20 years down the track, we can speak of them in the same sort of regard as Lauda or Prost, Senna, Schumacher, and all that. So,
or even when they do hang up the helmet, it might be too raw to make an instant judgment on drive. You need to probably just let it soak in just what the magnitude of whatever their achievements might have been, I guess, 5 years or 10 years, as you do say, just down the track. It's really got to be more of a historical concept, I guess.
Yeah.
You've got to let the sands of time pass
the nostalgia,
by. And
let the nostalgia develop and everything, because it's a bit unfair, I think, at the moment, as I was saying before about people looking through rose-tinted lenses. I mean, it's a bit unfair on the current crop, whatever sport you look at. If you're constantly just thinking about the past, the bygone era, saying that, they were better in every single way, because then, what's the point of watching or consuming the latest sport, the latest era of the particular sport? You might as well just go and watch your highlight
I've constantly
reels.
got 2015, 92, it's like 2000, 2013.
Yeah.
Constantly got like 2 columns there, instead of just having all the space in your mind just dedicated to what is going on at this very moment.
And
it's always
appreciate it for what it is. That would be the right thing to do. I mean, sure, 2015 hasn't been the most memorable season, but you just got to remember it for what it is. And once it's done and dusted, then you can go and compare it to previous seasons or whatever. But yeah, it's certainly unfair on a lot of the drivers that that they don't get the appreciation they deserve. I mean, certainly we don't take anything away from Hamilton or Vettel. They're great drivers. despite, we have differences when it comes to their personalities or whatever. But in terms of their driving ability, we think they are fantastic and they are the best of the best.
We could talk about this all afternoon, but we must press on for now.
Press
anyway.
on, yeah. I think we've gone a bit over time on that.
As ever, we're passionate about our various causes, I guess you could say. But Bernie Ecclestone, of course, it wasn't really as though we weren't aware of this notion, but indeed he's come out quite explicitly stating that Mercedes had an agreement in place with Red Bull there to supply power units 2016 and beyond, and he's now saying, to quote, in defense of Red Bull, the reason they cancelled their agreement with Renault is so they could do the deal they thought they had done with Mercedes. So they had acted on the advice, essentially, that that was all secure and they were really going to be able to integrate that package into their car immediately. But then when it came to the point where they had to give that notice to Viry-Châtillon that they were going to be moving on, they've come back, Mercedes, and said, no, we don't want to anymore. And really, we see where they are now, Red Bull, on tenterhooks, whether they're going to continue or not, and which shape they will take if they are to remain on the grid next season.
Yeah, it's sort of that's a bit interesting to see, finding out that they actually had a deal in place before. We thought they just had some talks, taken place. There was nothing concrete as such, but to find out that there was actually some kind of deal being negotiated for 2016 engines, it's quite interesting. And just don't know what to think on that. I guess it's no surprise in how Didi Matischitz's position was so non-negotiable when he said, we're gonna quit the sport now, because it seems like this, what Bernie says, it just makes it sound like Red Bull have been hard done by the other manufacturers almost.
And you do have to wonder as well, Ecclestone's got these little motivations, of course. These reports that he's engineering a deal to see quite inexplicably Renault continue in capacity in cooperation with Red Bull to aid their funding in terms of their factory return at Enstone.
Well, he won't do anything without any sort of financial benefit to himself. No. So, obviously he'd be doing it just to get... because I guess either way, we discussed it a month ago or whatever as well. Even if Red Bull quit the sport, Bernie's going to make a heck of a lot of money out of them, because they're
500 million, is
it? Yeah, they're contracted into the Concorde or whatever until 2020, and if they decide to pull the plug now, they have a massive fine to pay, and there you go. That's a big wad of cash into Mr. Ecclestone's pocket.
Win-win for Bernie.
Yeah, win-win for Bernie. But I guess, from a sporting point, I guess Bernie still has a bit of a sporting side to him, and he doesn't want to see 4 cars just desert the grid. So I guess that's why he's trying to engineer a deal as well, because he'll probably make more money off, keeping Red Bull in the sport than Red Bull leaving the sport and getting the...
It's just a matter of which share of the pie Ecclestone will end up reaping down the track. But he also continued on this topic. He basically just summarised quite flippantly that these kind of things happen in big families in regards to Mercedes reneging on their apparent word to supply Red Bull. And we saw Niki Lauda come out in contrast to this, talking about the boss there, Didi Matischitz, saying how he had approached him back start of the season, really saying how they've got quite a extensive relationship from their years, of course, they're countrymen, and pretty much just saying that Didi Matischitz had quite the negative mindset regarding Mercedes, and he needed to alter that opinion for any kind of collaboration to work, to have merit. And he also added the emphasis there that if they were to have a collaboration, it had to be a true partnership with really interestingly, the Red Bull drivers there having the support given there to Daimler through the Mercedes Association. They're really promoting that brand awareness there and making it almost like a quasi-factory operation, giving full airtime to them, and that never really happened.
Well, that wouldn't happen, considering. No. Well, why would that happen if Mercedes have their own factory operation? It's almost like they're saying, we'll give you engines, but you're not a team anymore. You're just sponsors for our factory team. So get on board with Brackley or whatever. So
in that sense, I guess it's understandable that from what he says that Mr. Matischitz there didn't continue proceedings. Nevertheless, the whole thing's just a bit of a to say politely, a mess.
Oh, it is a mess.
Recriminations continue today.
What did I say? I think I said something like it's manufacturer wars, instead of Star Wars or whatever. And in this manufacturer wars, we have a new hope, ha ha ha, in the form of a cheaper engine that's being tendered by the FIA and FOM probably this week sometime. And that's a low-cost 2.2-litre V6 twin turbo with a more simplified Kerr system. Now, there's a lot of people who say that this could be Cosworth's call back into the sport.
No, my mail's Judd.
Yeah, I was just going to say hilarious.
Told me.
I was just going to say that hilariously, if it was Judd, it would be, I don't know, I just fall off my chair laughing somewhere. But yeah, if that were to happen, that a low-cost engine would make its way into the sport as an alternative to the current hybrid turbo system, it'd be a huge kick up the backside for the manufacturers, because it would prove that, yeah, you can build that sort of a turbo engine at a low cost and make it competitive as well.
Nevertheless, so you'd have to say it'd be a message to them. They can't hold these independent, pretty much these teams which rely on their support, hold them to ransom, paying ludicrous amounts of money, compromising their own little chassis development there just to be on the grid. So clearly it's got merit either way. But we see, of course, Ferrari, they've come out with their infamous veto in opposition to this concept.
No, not opposition to the concept. First, the veto is towards this proposition to put a budget cap on the current hybrid turbo system, and Ferrari have said no way, because we want unlimited costs in developing our engine, so we can beat Mercedes or whatever, and we're going to do it. So that's why the FIA have pretty much said, yeah, well, if you don't want to cut costs, we're going to build a independent engine to give to those smaller teams. And I guess as well as competitiveness wise, it could allow the smaller teams to perhaps be a little bit more further up. It's also financially as well, it gives those bigger teams a hit, because then Mercedes certainly won't be getting their payments from their customer teams, and same with Ferrari. So I guess it would be good to see that you have an independent engine for those little teams and perhaps increase the competition. But at the same time, we've got to discuss parity as well, and whether they're going to be on par with each other, and what measures are going to be taken to make sure that those engines are equal.
Well, speaking of parity and the like there, we see with Honda, of course, they require some sort of parity just to be competitive, but it's emerged really the last few days as well that this exclusive arrangement with McLaren, it doesn't seem to be the case. We've heard Christian Horner talking about really meetings between his team and Honda, which is quite incidentally based out of Milton Keynes, so it's not like they're too far away. They could easily catch up at some cafe in the middle of their respective buildings. But Ron Dennis, he's not too amused by this notion Honda wants to essentially have a second customer in 2016, and yet Honda are quite insistent that they always signed up under the premise that they'd be expanding pretty much to a second outfit 2016 and possibly a third in 2017. So this is another little consideration in terms of where Red Bull shakes out next
very
season.
much so. And Bernie pretty much nailed it when he said that all these guys are worried about is asset protection in relation to Ferrari, Mercedes, and McLaren. The only reason that McLaren opted to make the switch to Honda was that Ron Dennis doesn't want to be a customer to anyone. He wants to be a manufacturer team. He wants to be the works team. And it's no surprise that he's fearing for his exclusive partnership between McLaren and Honda. And this is what you got to ask. Is this all this politics between the engine and the manufacturers? Is it good for the sports and also for the smaller teams? Certainly a lot of them are on tenterhooks as to whether they're going to survive in the sport or not. And that cheaper engine is a good ticket for them to hang on for a little while longer. And also, I wrote in a piece that I'm penning at the moment that it may also open the doors for more privateer teams to come back in, because certainly they don't want to have to be paying a huge wad of cash for an engine, and the rest of their money, whatever is left, will go onto the chassis, which might not be a lot of money left over considering how expensive the engine is.
Yeah, that'd be a sight for sore eyes, seeing those true garagistic concerns back on the grid, even if they've not really got any hope of being championship contenders, much less podium or race winners there, just to see that they're in it for the right reasons. As we did see, of course, as well, just a bit off topic, Graham Loudon came out and expressed his gratitude to Ferrari, even though their relationship, Manor Marussia and the Maranello outfit, is coming to a conclusion end of this season with Mercedes entering the fold. He was very grateful to Ferrari for their financial and pretty much technical support in the early stages of this season. Of course, all the tragic circumstances last year, and then the whole conjecture whether they'd even be on the grid this season. Those kind of real humble individuals, it's the lifeblood of the sport. It's a pity we don't see more of it in the upper echelons.
Well, didn't we say last week that, off the back of celebrating their 400th Grand Prix, shouldn't Sauber be entitled to more payments from FOM? Clearly clearly the commercial rights holder has no regard for, these teams that have stuck around for so long. And then Williams as well, Williams, I guess, is the epitome of those, the garagista thing, as you said. They've been a family-run team for, since the 70s pretty much, and look at them, they're still here today and on the way back up. So that would be great to see more of those sort of teams popping up and making an impact in one way or another. But I guess we better move it on now to our Mexican Grand Prix preview. I think we're going to go over time a little bit this week, but take it away.
Mexico, we're back here, and look at the stats. I think a certain mutual friend of ours would be quite pleased to see most recent victor at this event, man himself, Nigel Mansell.
Since when were we friends?
Yes,
he's gonna listen to this podcast and say, I've never even heard of these people, and they're calling me friends. What are they talking about?
Oh, well, we're his friends, even if it's not mutual from his end. But I could say that's certainly the case there, yes. But the track has been indeed heavily reprofiled since Nige took out that victory 1992 on his imperious charge to that title, which he enjoyed prior to scuttling off to stateside for IndyCar, where he did more, not to mention that crash at Phoenix. But a segue in there, we did get confirmation just yesterday that track will return to the IndyCar grid.
We're just getting carried
season.
Away now over to Nigel Mansell. We've got to do the Nigel Mansell special one day. But back to Mexico, yeah. So it's been redesigned by Herman Tilke, the architect of many circuits these days, the Hermanos Rodriguez circuit. More or less, the infamous Peraltada corner, which was a long swooping right-hander, similar to Parabolica in a sense of the Monza circuit. That's been split in half. And
bit of a shame, because there's a lot of conjecture that was one of the more spectacular.
Yeah, it was but it was for safety. Yeah, safety concerns. They had to modify it, and they've split it in half. So the final part of it still remains, turn 17, which has been aptly named Mansell Corner.
And they're flying Nige out, I think, indeed, to attend.
He's going to cut the ribbon or whatever, and the checkered flag as well on the first race. But yeah, they've split it in half, and they've put a sequence of low-speed corners in there. They've made it a stadium section. It looks like a baseball stadium there. So that's what's happened there. But it is a pretty wide circuit. There's plenty of overtaking opportunities for sure. It looks like it, 4.3 kilometre track.
Pretty short circuit, it must be said.
Yeah, pretty short. It's fast. It's power dependent with the long straights. A lot of stop and go corners as well. I was able to boot up F1 2015, well, dust off really, because I haven't played it for so long. And
what kind of times did you say you're achieving there? Were they comparative to what you said Tilke was mentioning?
Oh, before? I think Tilke said that 116, 117 in the dry would be good laps around here. But you got to forget, I'm no F1 driver. I'm just some guy in a room with his Xbox. I think I set 1 minute 19 in 1 minute 19.3 in a Williams, and it was a very difficult track to get a hold of. And I guess the most annoying part I found on the game was between turn 7 and 11, which is a high speed sort of left right sequence, or Yeah, left, right, or the other way around, but you'll get the picture when you see it. Yeah, and they're sort of high-speed corners, which I guess a lot of downforce will be good for. But then there's a lot of the stop and start corners as well, which will suit guys that probably don't have as much aero as others. We'll have soft and medium tires from Pirelli, of course. Conservative approach on their first visit to Mexico, we'll see. But the biggest talking point, I guess, is the weather still looms. Hurricane Patricia still about, and saw a tweet from Martin Brundle this morning after he landed in Mexico City, and ominous signs.
Yeah, well, it would be a shame if this overshadowed the weekend. You'd want to see some form of running at least before the 5 red lights to go out Sunday afternoon. But these kind of things have to be expected in this part of the globe.
Yeah, well, considering they've never run on this track before, it's going to be important to get those practice sessions in.
I think Nige might fancy himself if that did happen. He would strap in and say, "Let me take it away. I know exactly what I'm doing."
Yeah, and then he tries to drive around the old Peraltada and ends up,
in the wall.
in the wall. But yeah, as we said before, it's an opportunity for Rosberg to salvage the pride and second place in the standings as well from Vettel. Only 4 points separate the two at the moment. Both have shared 3 victories this season. And barring bad luck and those mistakes, Rosberg has been quick over the past 3 races. He had pole position from Japan to Austin. And yeah, it's either been bad luck or a mistake that's cost him those races. Reliability as well.
Yeah, well, certainly there's not much else to gain out of it for the German other than motivation, really. Just wipe the slate clean and treat almost these final 3 events as a bit of a prelude to 2016, which is quite definitive in his long-term career. You were mentioning off there how he's shaping up quite rapidly as a bit of a Rubens Barrichello Mark II. Once you get through pretty much a second title, we saw with Sebastian Vettel. By the time that occurred in 2011, Mark Webber was well and truly consigned to that back burner status. And for Nico Rosberg, it's now or never, really, in terms of defining his legacy. But really, I guess the straight, it's pretty obvious one there. Mercedes, they're going to be the front runners with the long straights there. They're going to come right into their own. And indeed, for another Mercedes customer, Force India, who we mentioned earlier as well, Sergio Perez, enjoying some fine form. He might be on track for a solid haul, and that'd be quite something, I guess, for the Mexican on home soil to end up breaking through for another podium after Russia. And we should mention as well, as we see Esteban Gutierrez, he will be announced in coming days at this circuit. He'll be the second driver alongside Romain Grosjean at Haas. So this will be a
it'd be surprising
moment.
if they just Haas are going to make the announcement and it doesn't end up as Gutierrez. But I guess all signs point toward him anyway. They're announcing it in Mexico, and Gutierrez Mexican driver, so that's pretty much a done deal as far as that's concerned. But yeah, Force India, they're on form with that B-spec chassis ever since the midway point of the season. And Perez, he finished 3rd, 5th. What's going to happen this weekend, depending on the weather, of course, as well. But yeah, Williams as well, after their double retirement in Austin, they'll be looking to strike back and get those crucial points. Lotus as well will be up there with the Mercedes engine. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. But hopefully this time when we do our Saturday or Sunday podcast before the race, we actually get some kind of running in there, some kind of qualifying and practice sessions to glean off.
Yeah, absolutely. Just first time out, it would be ideal just to know the lay of the land before proceedings get underway.
Very much so. And apart from that, I think we've pretty much covered all the bases for today. So
yeah, it's been quite another monster edition. Hopefully you can all make sense of it. There's plenty to discuss, and we do get quite passionate about several of the issues going on. But yeah, we've covered all those bases, I think, and let's get down to action again. It's always good when you get these weekends, these occasions with back-to-back races. It just keeps the flow and that vibe there. Really, it's a bit of a festival of racing.
Yeah, very much so. And even though the championship is done and dusted, we still have 3 races to go, still plenty of stuff to happen, quite a few narratives that need to have a conclusion. So yeah, very much so. And I guess for today, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, ciao.
See you later.